because I can only speak so loud, I guess.
Where
are you from?
Originally from Pakistan.
Pardon me?
Originally from Pakistan.
Why do you like it here?
I like it here a lot.
Well, you kind of drop like it's rather hot and dry.
You stop this one too. Yeah. So, anyway, I know there was some discussion of the footage that's just been released showing the 7-year-old Queen of England. Now, granted, I admit she was 7 years old, but in terms of her upbringing, very, very insightful. And I don't know if people seen it, of her gallivanting around in the backyard of one of the castles, Balmoral or one of the other ones, I forget which one. But they're all happily doing the Heil Hitler. And I believe it's her uncle, which was Edward VIII, which had was known Nazi sympathizer. And obviously there's other footage of Prince Philip, her husband, you know, walking along in a SS parade with Philip's brothers who were SS officers, right? So this is not an obscure or not an unknown topic, the royalty and their connection to Nazism directly. Not just the British side, but also the Dutch monarchy. Prince Bernhard was a card-carrying Nazi, right? And a lot of people might think that this is obscure, but it is not obscure, and has a very direct bearing to the situation right now. And, you know, I think just because it states it very clearly, I'm going to read this statement here. Maybe most of you have it. If not, everybody's got one? Miles, you got one there? Okay, so I just want to read it because I think it just goes through it and we can have just an elaboration of it. So, okay, so this came out July 14th. It says, Lyndon LaRouche pointed directly to the British monarchy and Queen Elizabeth herself as being responsible for the economic butchery being imposed on Greece today by her messengers, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble.
Who?
The Finance Minister, Schäuble.
That's his third Schäuble.
Yeah.
Schweigel?
Schäuble, you know, I've heard different pronouncements. You want to read along, you can read along here. I'm just reading this, so. That's what the Queen's late June visit to Germany was all about, including her personal conversations with, oh wait, what, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong statement.
So what we got?
No, I know, I'm sorry. Yeah, the one from yesterday from Lynn. On the, and then here's his plan.
Oh, it has the same picture as.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hold on one second, I'll grab copies of it.
Hey,
Good, how are you?
good. Busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's summer, but
Yeah.
just, you know,
There's-
working on a few stuff.
Yeah.
Few projects.
So serious.
Yes. Dave Christie.
Yeah.
Of
That's what-
our organization.
Okay.
I mean, I've been following,
Lyndon LaRouche every
I haven't
day.
so much this last week, which is, you know, there's a lot that happened this week, so it's like I'm not even on the same, it's like I'm not
No,
even
it's based
consistent.
out of Virginia.
I was really close, I was really keeping up with it. You know, like a week ago, I just kind of stopped watching the news, I was like listening to more music and
He
stuff.
travels a lot.
And I'm like, I turned the TV back on, because like all the stuff that's
Yeah.
I'm lost.
Yeah.
How do you do?
Yeah, you know, early touch. Greece made a deal on Sunday night. Originally,
Yeah.
Monday they were.
I've been here.
So it's coming out since Monday, and then Wednesday they voted on it.
Fascinating what you're doing.
And
Yeah, put the. So keep it in any.
Yeah,
Who does?
One,
this was.
go back to.
I gave
Gun.
I gave him one already. Yeah.
This is publicly online.
Isn't that something?
So,
You
you
have
know,
enough-
it courts you.
Yes, sir. Isn't that funny?
It's better whole. In fact, I'll stay with copies so you can.
Pardon me?
No, I have plenty of extra copies. Don't worry about that.
You can always save it. It
No,
saves
no, you
paper.
keep it.
I will.
No.
I promise to share it online on my.
Well, you can go ahead and keep credit. I brought these to disseminate, not to keep. Thanks, I'll print more up.
I think the best way to disseminate is on Facebook and Twitter, which I won't do.
Good, you have my blessing to send it to anybody you like. Good.
Okay, so July 16th. British Queen ordered Schäuble's murder of Greece. Here are her next orders for Obama. It was Queen Elizabeth II personally who ordered German Finance Minister Schäuble's virtual murder of the nation of Greece in Eurozone debt summit negotiations over July 12th through 13th. The Greek debt negotiations had been proceeding in June. Germany's demands against Greece were much more moderate at that time, according to an AP wire of today carried in the New York Times. But then those negotiations were adjourned on June 26th to await the results of the Greek referendum, which was held on July 5th. In that referendum, Greeks overwhelmingly rejected the austerity demands of Germany and the Eurozone countries. Now, during just the same period, the negotiations were interrupted. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II made a rare state visit to Germany over June 23rd through the 25th, and met there with Chancellor Angela Merkel, among others. It is not known at this time whether she also met with German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble. But on June 25th, the last day of the Queen's visit, Chancellor Merkel complained that the Greek negotiations had, quote, lost ground, and Schäuble warned that the sides were moving apart. Then, last Saturday, July 11th, on the eve of the summit which resumed the broken-off negotiations, Schäuble and the German delegation showed up with new demands, the toughest ever, which even their allies said, quote, came out of the blue, AP reports. One summit participant said that the extra demands were immediately perceived as provocative. Schäuble had received and carried out the Queen's orders. He even demanded that Greece be thrown out of the Eurozone. Although Greece was not thrown out at that time, the violations of sovereignty and genocidal conditions were so brutal that they amounted to Greece's murder. This makes it very clear, Lynn and LaRouche said today. Schäuble is barking for the Queen. Yet Schäuble was still insisting on a Greek exit from the euro today, even after Greece had signed on to his diktat. And he's going to get the exit he wants, said LaRouche. It's obvious he's going to get an exit. And that's when Greece will go to Russia. And once they go to Russia, at that point, what will happen is that the European continental region will go into a spin dive downward. And that will then shape everything. This is where the British are counting on Obama to set forth a casus belli, which will actually be a British casus belli. Saving the situation will be the pretext for the war. Russia will get an ultimatum: either you submit to us or we will go to war with you. The British will create a confrontation between Russia and the presidency of the United States, and Obama, the president of the United States, will go to war with Russia. That's the scenario, and the game against China is part of the same pattern. The case is clear. The question is, who's got the guts to face the reality? And there are very few people who have the guts to face that reality. Because what's going to happen is that suddenly the institutions of the United States government will then launch war. What Schäuble has done on the Queen's orders will be part of that pretext. The British Empire's policy will be then to get the United States to launch warfare against Russia, for which Russia will be prepared. It means the extermination of much of the human species, but the British Empire wants to reduce much of the human population anyway. But that's the reality. Let's see what kind of guts and brains people have, because there's nothing else we can do beyond that. We've got to make that the challenge. LaRouche concluded. So that is, at this moment, LaRouche's latest analysis. And I don't know how some of you were thinking about it, but I know for me, when you have a nation, which Greece did, which was in negotiations, they made it clear that the entire existence of the Syriza party was voted in to oppose the kind of brutal austerity demands that the Troika grouping was making, right? The International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Monetary Union, I think is what it is, or the Commission or whatever. But they made the point. This Syriza was voted in to stop this kind of austerity from being imposed upon the Greek people for a bailout they never even got. And this is the other side of this. They actually did, the Greek parliament did an investigation into the nature of the debt and came to the conclusion that all the bailout did was pass through the Greek people's hands on its way to other European banks and actually Wall Street banks, and by the end of it too, right? So, but they're the ones being forced to pay for it, but they never got the money. They never got the, it never was spent on the people and all the lines that come out, from the British run press. So they, in this independent commission, they made the point. The debt is illegal and odious, was their term. It was a very sharp statement by the Greek government on the nature of the debt, right? So the negotiations continue, and at a certain point, Tsipras says, I'm going to take this to the Greek people. Whether we should even really allow for me as the prime minister to continue these negotiations, right? So he brings it to the Greek people, and 61% vote in favor of what Tsipras was proposing, which was to reject the austerity, fight for debt reduction, and so on, right? So, and to be clear, that is a mandate, right? Now, the day after this mandate was handed to the Prime Minister of Greece, and really was a referendum in complete support of everything that the Syriza party was doing to fight against this, the day after that, the finance minister resigns, Varoufakis, and within days, all of a sudden, Greece is bringing back the same kind of rotten policies that were being forced upon them. And by the weekend, they had supposedly negotiated, and Tsipras brought back to the Greek parliament the worst program ever. Zero debt reduction, brutal austerity, a bailout that required the Greeks to offer up 50% or $50 billion worth of what's it?
Infrastructure.
Yeah. And I think Dieselblum, whatever he is, yeah, he was asked about it, and Dieselblum says, "Well, I don't know, airports, airplanes, railroads, banks."
I'm not understanding. 50 billion what?
It's in collateral. So in other words, for the Greek people to get the 85 billion cash, or financing so they can pay bills and stuff, they had to offer up as collateral public assets. Yeah, banks, Greek banks, infrastructure, airports, so, which is obviously things that are benefit the Greek people as a whole, and now they're going to be, and the level of privatization was just wild that the Troika grouping was demanding, right? So it just didn't make any sense. Like, why? How do you go from having a referendum one Sunday and then the Sunday later you agree to the most egregious, right? It just didn't make any sense.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Why is the harm?
Well, this is what Lynn was getting at in here, is that basically Tsipras was probably told, well, the point is, we have to recall, the point of this article makes it very clear. And the reason we started out with the discussion on the fact that, you know, you might think it's kind of funny to see a 7-year-old Queen Elizabeth out in the backyard of the castle doing a Heil Hitler and think, oh, she's just a stupid little kid, she doesn't know what she's doing. This is the British royalty. They have been through and through supporters of Nazi policies and literally Nazism, or the creators of it. Adolf Hitler was just the errand boy, right? So they're committed to a destruction of humanity in general, but what she laid out as her orders was, we're going to crush Greece. Now, what Lynn is saying is that the idea was to crush Greece to the point that Greece leaves the European Union and joins the BRICS orientation. The Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? And those nations have made it extremely clear, look, we don't want to kill you. You know, you got agriculture, you've got a awesome port that could be developed, the port of Piraeus, which coming out of the Suez Canal from the, you know, the Asian trade route, this one belt, one road concept that whatever, I think it's worthwhile to note. All the trade that would be coming through the South China Sea, through the Suez Canal, you could come right into Greece and unload and connect into the European rail grid, right? So Greece is, China wants to invest in Greece, and from that standpoint, Russia wants to invest in Greece from the Turkish Stream pipeline. And the BRICS orientation, as the president of China says, you know, we don't want the world where it's winner take all. We want a world where all can be winners, and this is how you do it. You cooperate with nations based on infrastructure and the development of the real economy, right? So now here's the point. What happens if Greece all of a sudden starts moving to the BRICS? And here's one aspect of this. Greece is a NATO country. Okay, now the other, what we have since found out, at least from qualified intelligence sources, is that Greece was probably offered, and the trip by Victoria Nuland to Greece should send shudders up people's spine, because of course Victoria Nuland organized and orchestrated the coup in Ukraine to overthrow the Yanukovych government, which was beginning to say, hey, you know, we're about to sign the papers on the European Union Association Agreement. I don't know, it doesn't look like anybody's getting all that treatment in the European Union. Maybe we don't want to sign, you know. And at the same time, Ukraine was being offered to join the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia, I think it is, right? And that's already being coordinated with the One Belt, One Road, Silk Road concept in China, right? So the idea was Ukraine was saying, maybe we should just move in this direction, or at least be a bridge between Europe and Asia, which is what Ukraine could have been. And of course, the bloody coup was launched, and Victoria Nuland was behind it, right? So not too long ago, who made a trip to Greece? Victoria Nuland, Obama's top, the head of the State Department's Eurasian and European affairs, right? So it was probably told to Tsipras, you don't play games anymore. We've overthrown your government before. In fact, Prince Philip's father I forget his name, King whatever the hell he was, because Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, right? Prince Philip was born in Greece, born in Corfu, and Prince Philip's father ran the 1967 junta to overthrow the government, right? Overthrow the what was a far left-leaning type group in these communists, which whatever may not have the same translation now to what we think of communists. But anyway, point was this is policy in Greece, and I'm sure Cyprus was told, "Are you ready for a bloody, violent overthrow of your government? Are you ready that maybe you won't make it through this coup?" And I'm sure that was posed. Now, the other side of this is, and this is where I think it comes up, because, you know, I know I've talked to people who say, oh, those damn Greeks, you know, they capitulated. They were holding the line. They had the people behind them. Why didn't they just say, you know, screw you, we're leaving the European Union, we'll join the BRICS, we could get new development bank credit, you know, we can get off this sinking crap hole called the Euro system, you know. Okay, now, this is one of these damned if you do, damned if you don't scenarios. Because Greece knows, and Greece was in intense consultations with many nations, including Russia and China. And I'm sure at a certain point it was made very clear, this isn't some decision that you, Greece, are making on your own, right? This has global implications. And I'm sure Russia and China know the strategic implications of it. But what the reality is if Greece were to have left the European Union, the entire the transatlantic financial system would have gone into a meltdown. Because the bonds associated with Greece would have every legitimate financial instrument, or whatever you want to call it, has in the European system and the transatlantic system, has upon top of it a mountain of derivatives and securities and financial speculation, okay? So it's not so much, because people have said it, well, who cares? Greece leaves, you know, what is it now? $3 billion payment, you know, or I think one of them was $1.5 billion or something like that. What's $1.5 billion? These are, you know, $1 trillion economies. $1.5 billion? No, that's not the point. The point is the mountain of the bubble of derivatives blows and sets off a chain reaction. Now the other thing is people say, well, why did the European Union, or the Germans, so-called, as people are calling it, although I think this makes it clear, it's not the Germans that were doing the negotiating, it was the British Empire through their agents in Germany who were negotiating an extremely hard line. And people say, well, why didn't people fight in Europe to just have a debt write-down? Well, you can't have a debt write-down, because once you write down debt, that blows out the derivative pile, right? The only thing that can be done that has any relevance to so-called saving the transatlantic system is in fact not saving it. We're going to wipe it out, but we're going to do it in a controlled, orderly manner, and we're going to wipe out the monarchies. We're going to wipe out the imperial banking apparatus of the British East India Company, and we're going to crush that. And the way you do that is with Glass-Steagall. So there can be all this discussion about whether Greece leaves the euro or whether they don't, and debt write-down. Forget about it. None of that can happen unless you have Glass-Steagall on the way, which will wipe out this mountain of derivatives and be the foundation upon, because once the dust settles and you can actually figure out what's actually legitimate, what debt is actually legitimate, then you can work out renegotiating payment structures and so forth, timing, how I got this debt, I can't pay it all right now, can I put it off over a 30-year period instead of a 20-year period, all these kind of things. You can do that under a Glass-Steagall standard, which really is on its way to being a fixed exchange rate type system where all nations know that we're no longer going to have things pegged to what people call the petrodollar, but it's actually a speculative dollar. We're going to go back to a fixed exchange rate where we have sovereign currencies that will relate to each other according to some kind of a peg, but that will provide stability by which nations can then begin to issue long-term credit for the kind of infrastructure that we see going with the BRICS process as a whole. And that's the only way out. So I hate to break it to you all, or maybe I should be happy to break it to you all, that, you know, the fate of Greece, the fate of Russia, the fate of China, the fate of the United States and Europe, it's all in our hands, and the key to it rests in Glass-Steagall. Now, the other side of this is this, what Lynn's statement is they do intend a war, and I think we should not be naive to that. Whether they would like to use this Greek situation, they may use another situation. I think what Lynn is saying is there's going to be some kind of provocation, which will, they're not, you know, the British monarchy isn't going to have a press conference where they say, you know, the Queen of England comes out and says, to my subjects, I want to start a world war with Russia. You know, they're not going to do that. But what they're going to do is there's going to be they're going to make it clear to the Russians, look, we know what the whole game is. We are not going to allow the ever powerful British monarchy, which traces its roots back to the Venetian Empire, which traces its roots back to the Roman Empire, which traces Babylon and Persia, and who knows how the hell far these guys go back in terms of their crazy outlook, right? They're not going to give that up. And what they're going to tell Russia is, you want to play chicken with us? You want to play chicken with our boy Obama? Right? Because you think he's not going to go crazy and launch a nuclear war? You know, you're going to trust Obama on this one? You know, we own him, and you are our target. So you back down. You get rid of this BRICS. We don't like it. You get back under the rules of our system, and you play by the rules of the British Empire. You sign on to the environmentalism. We collapse the potential, and we go back to feudalism, and you're all going to be our slaves and peasants. That's sort of the shorthand version of things. So we are on the edge of a war, and the only way that war can be stopped is the removal of Obama, which goes hand in hand with the passage of Glass-Steagall. There's the passage of Glass-Steagall is not us fighting to get a bill through Congress. The passage of Glass-Steagall signals that the end of the British imperial structures are over, and with it goes their puppets. So that's where we're at. I think, yeah, the point on the BRICS, and why I think it's fortuitous that Hal has spoken, or will be speaking tonight, is I can think of no perfect symbol of the end of geopolitics than connecting Russia and the United States through that. It's not, I don't want to go into all of it, maybe Hal will touch on some of this, but you know, in the end of the 1800s, the 1890s, the Transcontinental Railroad was constructed, and at the beginning of the 1900s, under the vision of Sun Yat-sen, you had the potential of that being connected through Manchuria. You had the Baghdad to Berlin Railroad. The potential of the Silk Road was alive at the end of the 1800s, and British geopolitics crushed it, which was, they were afraid that if China was connected to Europe through Russia, and Russia was to act as a cultural bridge between Europe and Asia, that would be the end of the British Empire and their control over all the crucial sea lanes, right? Why do you think the British, you know, in some sense, owned a good chunk of Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, you know, South Africa, you know, all the crucial, they owned the Arabian Peninsula.
India too.
Huh?
India as well.
Of course, yes, India, yeah, exactly. So, you know, so the British Empire knew that if they didn't control the sea lanes, and they had internal improvement and development between nations, that you would set up a new dynamic where geopolitics, so-called, where geopolitics would no longer be the rule. So I think the Bering Strait is a crucial, signal that that's over. And we had some fun last night in Vancouver. There was a gentleman from Shanghai who came over to present, China's idea around the One Belt, One Road. And it was somewhat, you could tell he was trying to couch it within terms of Western finance. And I think at one point he said, look, China with One Belt, One Road, we're still going to have the same rules, in the sense of standards and, an ability for finance to be translated amongst nations, and they're sort of setting up Shanghai as an ability to do this. But he said, but the intention will be different. In other words, the intention is not going to be speculative financial activity. The intention behind this is that the value is going to be ascribed to the economic growth provided through the infrastructure and the scientific and, expanding technology, so on and so forth, right? So, but it was very clear that the British leaning grouping within Canada had come to say that they weren't going to work with China unless it was under their standards. So there was some idea, we really would like to join the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, but it's going to be from our vantage point. And I think the director of the institute, this guy, Jack Turner was his name?
Austin.
Jack Austin, who I think was the longest serving senator in Canada.
Federal Senate.
Federal Senate. And he was also the chief of staff of Trudeau when Trudeau was involved in opening up China, or there was sort of the whole Nixon time where Nixon was sort of when China was beginning to open up to the West, Deng Xiaoping and so forth. But this guy sort of preempted the Bering Strait. He said, yes, he intended to. He said, Canada would love to work with China. And I think the key to China working with Canada is going to be the Northwest Passage, which is a little funnier on a globe. It's easier to see. I'll show it on a globe. But basically, the Northwest Passage is this way.
No, David, it's actually through the channels there, internal.
Down this way?
Yes,
Oh, okay,
exactly.
all right, okay. But on a globe, it makes a bit more sense, I guess.
Also on that drawing over there, on the wall.
Right. Which, will actually be, but basically it would be kind of coming up through here. Oh, sorry.
What, a rail?
No, just
Boats.
shipping lanes.
Boats and the ships.
That's only open in the summertime, right?
That's true.
Yeah, it's only open until we master the weather. we have to rely on God, I don't know if we want to do the rain dance or the snow dance or whatever you want to call it. But it was nice because Hal, of course, interjected, wait a second, what about the Bering Strait? And it was like, ooh, And the guy from Shanghai was sort of like, you could tell he was like, well, yeah, that's the one that makes the most sense, but I've been basically told here that there's not really all that much interest in it. And something was raised on the money, and he said, and it appears that can't, because it's too big of a project in China. Says, well, we've got money for these kind of ventures. We see the economic benefit of this, and we've got no money shelling out some money for this. And then his response was that But apparently Canada isn't all that interested in Chinese direct investment. That we've got our own financing, is how Canada put it. In other words, we've got Goldman Sachs, we've got JP Morgan, we've got the British.
Forget the Bank of Montreal.
Yep. We've got the old dope banks and HSBC and so forth. So anyway, so this is the battle that we're in. And Glass-Steagall is the crucial fight. I don't want to go too long, but just so people do know, we did have a major intervention this last Monday. Some of you probably heard about this, but one of our activists was able to sneak into Hillary Clinton's big economic. Everyone wondered, where does Hillary stand on the economy? We want to know what your programs are. We want to know what your thoughts on finance and banking are, right? So Hillary probably put together tens of millions of dollars of polling data, you know, expert this person, expert that person, you know, program here, program there, tens of billions of dollars, gave this completely boring speech, which our activist Daniel Burke, he said, you know, look, I sat through it. I didn't want to interrupt her, let her say what she was going to say, but at the end, he couldn't stand it anymore, got up. Where do you stand on Glass-Steagall? And of course, she just kind of does the, I don't want to talk about Glass-Steagall. I just paid all this money to not talk about Glass-Steagall. And he again, Senator Clinton, where do you stand on Glass-Steagall? And by about the third time he got it out, he was, you know, being brought out by Secret Service.
Really?
However, he gets out into the lobby, and every press from around the world has a microphone in his face asking him, and he handled it very well. He said, look, I didn't come here to bother her. I listened to her whole speech. I just wanted to know, this is the crucial issue. Where does she stand on Glass-Steagall? And I didn't get an answer, you know. And
She should take questions.
yeah, right. She should take questions. I mean, what the hell kind of speech is this? You're going for the presidency and you don't even want to talk to
I know
the
she
people.
takes questions.
Yeah, right. So anyway, but that 1,500 different articles, every press from around the world, but it has made Glass-Steagall now the crucial issue. And I want to make this point. We're not making Glass-Steagall a crucial issue for 2016, and then for the election of 27, or, you know, when the actual swearing in of January 2017, and maybe some action by, you know, February or March of 2017. No, we need action on this week, right? We're at the edge of the disintegration of the whole system and war that will come from it. So that's where we're at. I guess I will just ask if there's any questions or comments, just briefly, and then we can jump to Hal.
Yeah, just a quick question. You know, there's going to be a debt write-down, whether they like it or not. And if they're forcing, if they're forcing Greece out of the euro, there's a debt write-down. You know, either, I don't care whichever way you cut it. So they're going to lose. Now the question is, there was an article in the New York Times where the Italian press said, we don't like him either. He scares us too, about Schäuble. Right? He scares us too. So the question is, if they force them out, there's a debt write-down. See, that's the tricky question to me, is then does everything go down the sinkhole, the derivatives bubble and everything else with it? You know, or is it a manageable amount of debt write-down that they factored in already with a Greece exit, you know?
You know, to be honest, I don't.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
You know, I can imagine that. I know they do have cash reserves and things like that to deal with crises, and maybe they would have. Maybe Greece would be forced out, and maybe they would plug that hole with a kind of internal euro-wide bailout, and maybe that would do it. The important point that I would think on the pushing them out it's more of a political statement. In other words, they could weather the financial storm of like a shock by having a nation leave, but if they do it in a brutal way, then they tell Spain and Portugal and Ireland and the so-called pigs, right? They tell them, you see that? We'll be worse for you. You know, you heard about the coup that we were threatening for Greece. Well,
Yeah.
you know, you're going to have coups and assassinations.
Yeah.
So you stick in the game. So maybe that would be part of the idea. I also don't think there's a lot of long-term thinking on this.
There's not. It's very short term. That's what's scary.
It's coming down. There's no way.
Isn't that what Lynn was alluding to in that piece you read? It's basically setting up, you know, the pins to take out Russia and China,
Right.
you know, a provocation for war.
Because if they can open up the BRICS, and you know, particularly, I mean, Russia is like the dream of these guys, right? And Putin said it. He says he calls it the taiga is the term for the tundra forest, right? Or Siberia, right? He says something like they want to take the taiga from the Russian bear, but Russia won't give up its taiga, and we will send the bear after them. And the bear, of course, is the long-range bomber of Russia. So he's making it clear, we know you assholes want to come steal our wealth in Siberia, but we will defend this with nuclear weapons, so don't mess with us, which of course is also the other, as one of our Russian friends so eloquently explained, he said, all this talk about Russia going out and taking back the Soviet Union and taking over Ukraine, like we need any more land. You know, we got 140 million people, or I don't know if it's 170 million, whatever it is. You know, we can't even develop the Siberian area. You know, why are we getting more land to conquer, you know? But now here's the point. If the British can back the BRICS nations down, freak them out about, and I think this is also the other thing that we were getting at this event yesterday, was this emphasis on China working with the EU, right? Now, that's not a bad idea, but is it the British-run EU? Is it the idea of co-opting Russia into the Silk Road idea, or I'm sorry, China into the Silk Road, with the eventual idea that we're pushing Russia out, and that would be, you know, another part of the game or whatever. But it was a journalist, Chinese journalist, who made the point. He says, you asked the question. He says, if China is putting all of its eggs in this European Union basket, well, you know, who's to say what kind of crisis can result in the EU? Greece is showing that there's mood for crisis. Are we not throwing all of our eggs into a basket that's already broken? You know, so that was an interesting question. But that would be the only way the British Empire could exist, is if they can crush the BRICS and loot Russia and other nations as well.
So what are you guys doing about this? We're about to tell you.
We're gonna just so people know, when I brought up Glass-Steagall and us passing Glass-Steagall, this is not just a kind of a wish list or something, right? We had a bill in the House of Representatives, HR 381. We got that in almost on the first day of Congress by some of our friends in Congress, Walter Jones and Marcy Kaptur. We were told that there was going to be a Senate bill in. We were then told that some of the senators said, geez, you know, Wall Street's really breathing fire down our back here on this one. I don't know if it's a little too hot. And it was really only, about 2 weeks ago, where the implications of the Greek situation became clear, that the Senator Warren of Massachusetts, Cantwell here in Washington, John McCain, his infamous broken clock routine, you know, the broken clock that's right twice a day. Well, John McCain is right twice a year, and it's on one's on Glass-Steagall, and the other one's against torture, I think. But and then Angus King from Maine. And did Sanders actually sign on to the bill? Or
No,
did
he
just...
just introduced his
Okay.
own bill.
Oh, really? For Glass-Steagall? Oh, wow. So, okay, so we have two bills in the Senate because
I'm determined to be an independent, folks.
Because after the Senate version of Elizabeth Warren introduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall bill, they introduced a second one in the House of exact same language. And that's important because if you're going to ram a bill through the Congress in emergency style, you need two bills exactly the same wording, because then it doesn't have to go into reconciliation after that. It can just immediately be thrown onto the desk of Obama, and if he vetoes it, he's gone. Impeached. Or so so we do have a bill in the Senate.
Are you guys with Bernie Sanders?
Glass-Steagall?
No, we're with Lyndon LaRouche.
Oh, no, like for the presidential candidate?
No, well, I'll put it to you this way.
The organization is.
Lynn has made it extremely clear that he thinks that O'Malley at this point is the most qualified. He's been asked about Sanders, and he's on a couple of occasions said there's not much there, and take that how you will. However, the way we approach things is by influencing the institution of the presidency as a whole, and others will do things in that light. And you know, Sanders has done relevant things in his career. You know, he's done some courageous things. He's been against the wars. He's been right on this Wall Street question. So, we'll, you know, that's kind of our approach. But in terms of the candidate that probably has the most to him, it would be this O'Malley guy.
I had a quick question about leverage and legitimacy. I guess in this discussion, are we kind of taking as like a first premise that there doesn't need to be any sort of public consensus about these ongoings, or are we sort of establishing that there's kind of like a public sphere and then there's like a para-political sphere in which these operations are going on, and they're like distinct and they can't really, I guess it seems like, you know, the Queen has so many plans, but it's just like, I mean, does she have enough leverage to actually effectuate those plans? It just seems like she's asking, it's such a tall order that she's going after. It's like, how can she get away with that without, and how can she get that many people, you know, from where she's sitting to like the soldiers in the front line to actually cooperate? I mean, what kind of, I mean, where is the leverage? Is it in some sort of media campaign, some sort of?
Shall I answer the question? It's very simple. She threatens people's lives. I bet you Mr. Tsipras had his life threatened, and a whole lot of other people have too. And I'll bet you Schlegel was told, if you don't do it, your personal safety might be in jeopardy. Let me give you an example. Maria Cantwell was an early supporter of the Glass-Steagall Act several years ago. Barack called her in his office, and he told her, Maria, I want you to withdraw your support of the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, if you do, that's fine. If you don't, your political career may be in jeopardy, and perhaps your personal safety. Does that sound like a threat? That's exactly what happened.
But like, say if tomorrow Tsipras turned up, he didn't show up to work, and it found out that he was killed. I mean, I'm just imagining, like, you know, even if someone like Tsipras got killed, how would that actually? I mean, I'm thinking like if I was Tsipras, okay, she's making this call, she's betting that she can kill me and still go along with what she's doing. I would call her bluff and say, you know what, I'm at the center of the world really right now. How can you kill someone who's actually at the front line of
You know
the whole
why?
controversy?
Because he's wondering who's supporting me.
That's what he's wondering.
Well,
Yeah.
let me say this. First off, you'll never find the transcript of what the Queen of England said to Merkel or Schäuble, or you'll never. As far as the public coverage of this goes, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip took a historic trip to Germany. It's a rare state visit, but they went and saw this. They had some discussions here. They went to Bergen-Belsen, I think, one of the concentration camps, or maybe that was their romantic getaway or something. But
Maybe it's revealing their true character.
yeah. So that's not public knowledge what he's saying. But look, the way these things work is it's people throw out the Masons and the Bilderbergs and the this and that. The way these organizations work is relatively simple. Your initiation is you do something heinous, and probably each one of them, sort of the higher you get, not because by doing it, and you do it in a public setting, such that the social code of what it means to be an insider is enforced by everybody sharing in heinous acts, whether it's orgies, whether it's ritual sacrifice, all this. I don't even want to go there. I don't know some of this stuff. I've never obviously been to these events, but there's enough to show how these things work, and that's how the monarchy operates. They don't operate on like getting on the horn and oh shit, so and so is going to do this. They have the structures in place for the control, and you don't really get to certain positions without having been corrupted in some form or another. That'll just wipe you out.
Pull the string.
Oh, did we not remind you about those pictures that we have of you and you? Would you like your wife to see those? We can send them to your wife this afternoon. And, nope, that's and then that's the end of it. That's how they operate. Those kind of. But look, they're dying. I mean, I wish no one's death, but 88 and 91, they can't be around for too much longer. And to be honest, Charles and some of these other wackos that are coming up behind them, so we have to take this opportunity. But I'd rather just turn it over to Hal. Do you want to see that?
Yeah.
We're gonna just see if this microphone.
We're strapping you in.
Oh, good.
Hold on to your horses.
How about
Or whatever you call them. Testing. No.
Okay. The other one, do you want to try this one?
Well, if you want to have him, he's got to basically put it in his mouth. That's what you heard.
Yeah.
Would you want to do that? Just put it right.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. What if you just grab it? Just quickly, Hal has been one of our staunch allies in this battle, and is a PhD chemical engineering, right? But you got your civil engineering degree at University of Washington, is that right?
Master's and PhD and bachelor's of chemical.
Okay. Oh, okay, the other way around. Okay. And so Hal's been involved in just about every kind of infrastructure and energy projects you can imagine. But what Hal has done is taken on a personal mission to really fight for some of the big ideas, the Bering Strait Tunnel, the Eurasian Land Bridge, and so I think it'll probably give some sense of, and as people saw this article in the Atlantic, the woman, maybe Hal will say more on this, but as far as I understand, the woman was tasked to write the article because Yakunin of the Russian Railways had made this statement on it, and of course the CNN covered it, the idea that you could have a superhighway from Manhattan to London. You know, it's a big idea for a lot of people. So this woman, Adrian Shirk, writes the article and realizes, who even knows about this thing? And when she called Hal, it was like, this guy knows about it. So anyway, so that article I think is a good view of Hal. So anyway.
What, am I supposed to hold this?
It's not on.
Oh.
It's up, it should be on.
Is it on now? You
It's
can
on.
hear it, yes.
You can use the stand if you like, but you gotta put it pretty close.
Well, we've got to take care of the stand. Does it work now? Does everybody hear me? Or you can't tell the difference?
I don't think it's near,
Yeah.
it's a very small room.
Yeah, it's probably fine without it.
Why don't I just hold it by hand, okay?
Yeah.
There we go.
Then I know we got reactions. We were in Vancouver yesterday, as David said. And a gentleman by the name of Jack Austin, who had been in the Canadian Federal Senate, and he was the head person of this graduate institute on China-Canadian relations, was saying we really didn't need to develop more infrastructure in northern Canada. All we needed to do was to open up the Northwest Passage so the ships could go. And when it came to the question and answer period, I raised my hand and said, no, we aren't going to get by with just the Northwest Passage, starting with the fact that there's lots of resources along the land in both Canada, Alaska, and then on the other side in Russia. He was not happy and left the room. And then I pointed out the Bering Strait Tunnel. Now, the LaRouche organization is concentrated on the Glass-Steagall Act and financing system. I'm looking at what you do to make the project work. And knowing that Canada is extremely sensitive about its economy and its export economy in particular, I pointed out that what we needed to do was to load oil from the tar sands in Fort McMurray and maybe do it in Hardisty, which is where the terminal is, and put it in tank cars and take it to the refineries in China. And that's Canada's #1 export, oil. A lot of it goes to the United States. Some goes to China. Canada, the people have a psychotic fetish about pipelines. They think these are the only things that matter. And they've been stopped every time they've turned around. The Keystone Pipeline to Texas, the Northern Gateway's pipeline to Prince Rupert or Kitimat, and then the pipeline to Quebec. Ontario and Quebec said you're going to be building a pipeline through our territory over our dead bodies, basically. Well, that doesn't sound like a positive way to ship oil. And so I said, well, look, let's haul it by rail. And why would we do that? Because that alone justifies being able to build a tunnel. Why did I bring it up? Because I knew it's so sensitive in Canada. Now, China has been making a number of investments in Vancouver and throughout Canada. They've also made a lot of investments in Alberta, including in the oil-producing areas. I understand they changed the rules on land ownership in British Columbia about a year or so ago, about allowing export from people from other countries, like China in particular, to own land. And they've made it much more restrictive. Well, Chinese already own Vancouver, or pretty close to it. I understand 80% of the land in the downtown area is owned by Chinese. David and I saw a very disturbing sight yesterday on Georgia Street, east of downtown Vancouver. We looked out to the left and we probably saw at least 500 people in a 4-block area who were all homeless. Many of them on drugs. And they looked like they were pretty bad off. This is worse than anything I've seen in Seattle. It's worse than anything I've seen in Los Angeles, which is much worse than Seattle. And I suspect a lot of these people are on drugs, but all of them can't afford to have houses in Vancouver because it's too expensive. And part of the reason is the Chinese have bought things up. But nothing is being done to protect them. Now, this is another part of the British policy. We only take care of the rich people. We don't take care of the poor people, and increasingly the middle class people are increasingly becoming the poor people. You're seeing somewhat the same problem in Seattle, but maybe not quite as inhumanly as in Vancouver, but it was quite disturbing to see that, wasn't it, Dave? Now let's get to the Bering Strait Tunnel. The original proposal to build it was dated 1846 by the governor of the territory of Colorado named William Gilpin. And he proposed to build a railroad out to the Bering Strait and then build a dam across the Bering Strait, which you would build the railroad on. And then it would go to Russia. Russia was in the process of trying to start the construction of its Trans-Siberian Railway. Now, when you read the history of the Trans-Siberian Railway, you will always hear that there was a great deal of opposition to it, but it was never said who the opposition was or why they were opposed. The British financial interests were the ones who were opposing, because they did not want the landmass of Eurasia to be connected by land internally, so that their maritime shipping interests would be upset, and they would no longer be able to control what was happening on the Eurasian landmass. Now, fast forward, there were other proposals. There were proposals after the Civil War. There were some serious proposals in the 1890s, and then in 1906, a company was actually incorporated in the state of New Jersey that had Russian, French, and American people involved. And they funded what was then the astronomical sum of $300,000 to do a detailed feasibility study, which they did. And then they committed $300 million and they raised it to start building the system. And that was when World War I got started. And where did it start? In Serbia. Create a trigger, just like David has discussed right now. It's opposing the British. Well, I see they want to get Obama to start a war, which I'm sure is exactly what the plan is. Well, maybe the Russians need to drop an atomic bomb on Buckingham Palace. But I don't think it's going to come to that as long as standing prevails. And we do need the BRICS. The United States needs to join the BRICS. And we need to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And all those things are the political background. But I'll give you the situation about the Bering Strait Tunnel project. The tunnel would cross a 53-mile crossing between Alaska, Wales, Alaska, and in the region of Chukotka in far northeastern Russia. The tunnel would be between 65 and 75 miles long. The earlier proposals were 63 miles. The most recent proposal by the Chinese was 75 miles. In May of last year, Professor Wang Mingchu of the Tsinghua University in Jiaotang University in Beijing proposed building a railroad from Beijing to Los Angeles, Denver, Chicago at a cost of $550 billion. And he said the Chinese are prepared to commit to that, and they don't need anybody else's money. And that stirred things up to a certain extent, but you'll notice the almost complete absence of publicity in the United States about it. I believe there was an article in the New York Times about it, but there wasn't much else. And there certainly was an effort to try to make sure people in the United States did not know about this. Well, going back in history of when did I become involved in this, it actually happened in 1993. The American Railway Engineering Association, which is a professional organization of railroad engineers in the United States, it's based in Washington, set up a committee, and it was headed by a gentleman by the name of George Kumal, who lived in Tucson, Arizona. He was a mining engineer, and he had done a lot of work in Russia. He was actually from Czechoslovakia. He called a meeting in Fairbanks, Alaska in May of 1994, which I attended. And he had asked me to give a paper, which I prepared and gave. And it was on the subject of, if we build the tunnel, why are we going to build it? And what are we going to haul in it as compared to how do we build it and what are the engineering features? It appears George Kumau was actually a subterranean British agent, because it was one of these things where we set up a group to make it look like we're doing something when in fact it looks like we're really trying not to. Well, anyway, there was 26 people at this meeting and 5 of them came from Russia. And I got to talk to all the people from Russia. One of them was Dr. Victor Raspegin, who heads one of the rail institutes in Moscow. And he actually had been the main organizer and author of a study in the year 1999-2000 by a transportation research institute in Moscow that actually was completed and was made public just before New Year's Eve of 1990, before George Bush took office in January of 2001. And an overture was made by the Russian government to the US government and to the Bush administration at that time, but nothing happened. It was basically ignored. There was some article, believe it or not, there was an article in the Bellevue paper, there was an article in the Washington Post, there was an article in some other newspapers, but not that much publicity. Then in May of 2007, there was a conference in Moscow, and it was on the Bering Strait tunnel. And there were several people from Alaska who went there, including former Governor Walter Hinkle, who was a strong proponent of building the Bering Strait tunnel. At the end of that conference, a delegation from Russia went over to Washington, D.C., and they met with Bush and Cheney at the White House. And Cheney said to the Russians, after the Russians asked the United States to cooperate, and they said the estimated cost of the tunnel project was $75 billion at that time, and that they were willing to commit $25 billion. And Richard Cheney said, there's no way in hell we're going to let the Bering Strait tunnel get built. Well, of course, Cheney was in the pot because of the British people. And that stopped. Well, the Obama administration would certainly be in the camp of those similar to Cheney. And of course, the real intentions came out, as David pointed out earlier to you guys tonight, about Victoria Nuland being given the task of starting a war in Ukraine, encircling Russia and forcing them to back down or get in the war. And as you can see, Vladimir Putin's a far better chess player than Barack Obama. And we haven't had a war yet. Well, this past year has seen a lot of activity under the radar screen of the Bering Strait. But I think the most important development was the Chinese proposal to actually finance the construction of the project, because they certainly have the ability to do it and the willingness. So in the meantime, what they're doing is they're building a whole series of corridors across Asia. Russia and China have agreed between the two of them to spend $155 billion to build a high-speed rail line between Moscow and Beijing. And that will be built primarily along the Trans-Siberian Railway. I'm not sure, though, which gauge it's going to be. I've heard that it may be Russian gauge all the way to Beijing. But this is an issue that we have to deal with the Eurasian land bridges. The standard gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches or 1,483 millimeters is 3.5 inches less than the Russian gauge at 1,520 meters or 5 feet even
It's just enough. You can't run trains from one to the other. And in the Eurasian Land Bridge program so far that I understand, when you go from China to Kazakhstan, all the cargo has to be unloaded off the cars and put on other cars, which takes time. Now, the Spanish people, the Talgo company, who actually built the trains that operate between Eugene, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, have the capability of going between different gauges. The cars do, the locomotives do not, at least with the technology they had when those trains were built. I understand the Spanish now have a system where the locomotives can move it in the same way as the cars, and you can go from one gauge to the other. And in fact, Talgo has recently sold 11 train sets to the Russian railway for service between Berlin and Moscow, so that they don't have to go through this gauge changing at Brest in Poland, at the border of Poland and Belarus. So incremental improvements are coming one at a time, but there is really a need for a policy change. And that will, of course, occur when we get the Glass-Steagall. But in the meantime, we have 4 countries that are essential to the success of the Bering Strait Tunnel project: Russia, China, Canada, and the United States. And Russia and China are both on board of this already. Russia wants to build it, Chinese finance it. But that support is not there in official circles in the United States at this time. And this organization has been the only one of any political or economic orientation who has ever taken a stance in favor of the Bering Strait Tunnel in this country. The same is true in Canada. And that's a pretty sad state, because you have this mentality where if you go out and talk to people on the street right now and ask them, should we build a tunnel under the Bering Strait, they'd say, what the hell are you talking about? You know, we need to get into another war in the Middle East, or we want to invest in derivatives, or we want to end Social Security, Medicare, or whatever the right-wing Republicans say, or the Democrats who say, well, we need to worship and glorify environmentalism so we don't have any economic growth or development. Both of them are bad, just different, that's all. Do you agree? And that's what we've been up against. Well, I did a feasibility study between September of 2002 and February of 2006 on building a railroad line from the lower 48 up to Alaska. But my project sponsor asked me to look at what would we do to build a tunnel under the Bering Strait, how would we connect it to Asia and Europe, and what would we have to do to our infrastructure to make it happen, and what kind of traffic would we have? And the project was emphasizing traffic. What is it going to take to make it work? Because if we try to just build it and then say we're going to put the money up and build it, it's not going to happen. Having some dealings now with the Chinese about financing railroad projects, they invest in things that make economic sense. And that's why I brought up the issue of oil in Alberta. Knowing that the two countries had interest in wanting to deal with each other for differing reasons, but that at the same time there's a common linkage between the two of them, we do see the necessity for them to work together. But you have this group in Ottawa who is actually responding to orders from London, just like you have a group in Washington and New York who's also responding to people in London who don't want any of this to happen. And that's why it hasn't happened so far. And what David has talked about tonight about Greece is just a prelude to what could happen to all of us if we don't take action against them. And what we saw in Vancouver yesterday, was probably a very good prelude to what we're talking about. And that was a very disturbing scene yesterday for me. I could go into a whole lot more detail about this, but I think from a strategic standpoint, it's a matter of getting Europe, Asia, North America together on this. And as David has pointed out, the Bering Strait is the critical linchpin and the symbolic end to the era of the British Empire in British geopolitics, which sadly our leaders in Washington, D.C. and our financiers in New York have sold out to and have been for a long time. One other thing that it preceded the Bering Strait Tunnel by a long time, but it's a little history. And of course, this is the only organization in the United States that looks at history as it really is instead of what we're being told it is. Do you agree?
Yes.
When the Revolutionary War ended at the Treaty of Paris of 1783, the United States was given its political independence. But there was a clause in it that wasn't down on the treaty. And that was that the financial group in New York, which had started with the Dutch and then went to the English and they were together, remained in place. And it never changed. And their alliance has always been to London. And in the Civil War, they were the group who were the Copperheads, who were actually very bitterly opposing the Union. And Abraham Lincoln went around them by setting up the National Bank in Philadelphia, not in New York. And they basically made the money available to win the war. Now, there's another bit of history in this that involves the relationship between Russia and the United States, because the American people have been led blindly to believe that Russia has been our eternal enemy. Now, what's the real story? In the Civil War, when Lincoln decided that he was going to basically overrun the financial group in New York, who were the British spies and agents, because they were actually secretly supporting the Confederacy because they wanted to set up the Greater Caribbean economic prosperity sphere. And the first step in that was to overthrow Benito Juarez in Mexico and install Emperor Maximilian in France as their puppet. And you know, you all have heard about the Cinco de Mayo holiday, and everybody has a party. Well, that wasn't the original reason. This was the celebration of the overthrowing of the French in 1862 in Mexico City. Now, what was happening? The British were taking the supplies to Mexico, and then they were carried across the King Ranch in South Texas, and they ended up in the Confederacy, and the English were threatening to blockade ports and to outdo the Union. And what they really wanted to do was to stop the flow of gold from California to the East Coast to support the war. Well, they were about to be successful in that because while the United States Navy had the power to overcome the Confederate Navy, it did not have the power to overcome the British Navy. Well, the Crimean War had just been completed between Russia and England, and the emperor, or the Tsar, I'm not sure whether it was Alexander or Nicholas. It was Alexander. Okay. Hated the British. So he said, I'm going to send our ships to San Francisco and New York. And he tells the British, you go ahead and try and attack those ships. They backed off. And the money came in, and they had the money to support their war effort. And as you can see, they won. Now, another interesting sidelight of this is how many of you have ever lived in the state of Texas?
Where?
Texas.
Texas.
Texas. There's three of us in this room.
I've never lived there, but I've been there.
Good.
Oh,
Me too. Well, the King Ranch was the largest single private property entity in the United States for a long time. How did they get rich? Did they get rich on cattle? No, they got rich on carrying supplies from Mexico across their land to Corpus Christi so it could be taken to Louisiana and Mississippi and used to support the Confederacy, and that's how they got rich. And as you also know, Texas was a state that had a very strong Confederate support, but it also had a lot of Germans who were supporting the Union. They lived in Fredericksburg and New Braunfels. And there was actually wars in South Texas where the Germans were basically annihilated in 1864. Another interesting feature was the Comanche Indians made a deal with the Germans, and the German properties were never attacked, but the properties of the English and Scottish related people were decimated, and that was one reason that there was a movement away from what is now the Austin, San Antonio, Dallas corridor back eastward because it was not safe. And of course, after the Civil War, a lot of the soldiers were put back in the army and used to fight the Indians until they beat them. And how the story happened in Texas was that in 1876, General Mackenzie wanted to find out where the Comanche Indians kept their supplies. Found out it was in the Palo Duro Canyon near Amarillo. And these people were being supported from Mexico. And he waited until all the Comanches were out on raiding central Texas, and he sent a detachment in, and they killed 1,500 horses and took all the people captive. And then when all the warriors came back with worn out horses, there was nothing there. And then they just took them all to reservations, and that's how Texas finally became a peaceful place. But it was very much still a lot of British orientation there as well as elsewhere in the United States, particularly in New York. But the Bering Strait Tunnel will be a critical linchpin of the future, and it will be the ultimate symbolism of the victory of the LaRouche movement over the British oligarchy. And with that, I thank you.
So the Comanches were involved in getting supplies through Texas to the Confederates.
No, the Comanches wanted the Confederates out of their life, so they tried to kill them, and they did. But after the Civil War, when the Army, when they basically a lot of the troops who, when they disbanded them after the war, they just drafted them back. They encouraged them to volunteer because they didn't have any jobs for them. So they just sent them out west, and while probably every Indian was worth five soldiers, when they were outnumbered 20 to 1, they would eventually lose, and they did. And the history.
Pardon? Can you talk a little slower?
All right. Well, they put so many troops in Texas that eventually they won. Just pure military superiority.
This is obviously, going to be. Can I say that? It's obviously going to be a fantastic project, and I had actually read some article about it. I didn't notice your name, so it's really impressive. I had read some news about it that this was something that's mumbled over, but what David was saying was about the Glass-Steagall Act, that we have to do something about that. I'm not sure I understand what we're going to do or what LaRouchePAC plans to do and how the bill is going to pass. And you said that we want it passed very soon. So I don't hear a lot about that. This Glass-Steagall Act in any news or anything like that. So I'm just wondering how that's going to effectively be possible.
Well,
or what's your plan? What are you asking us to do?
Well, let me put it to you this way, because when we finally got the Senate bill 2 weeks ago, my timing might be off on that, and Mr. LaRouche said we need an all-out mobilization. We didn't exactly know how we were going to get something to crack on it, right? But then this past Monday, we had this intervention by Daniel Burke. Now, we didn't know that that was going to happen, nor did we know that that was going to have the radiating effect that it did, where all of a sudden that's become the crucial defining issue of the U.S. presidency right now, especially for the Democrats. Now, in terms of how to answer how do we get it passed through, I'll be blunt, I don't know. you know, I don't know exactly what it's gonna look like. I can only tell you this, when we initially started the campaign, or let me actually, if you go way back after the 2007, 2008 collapse, and then the bailout, and then the Dodd-Frank bill, Senators Cantwell and McCain actually teamed up to put an amendment into the Dodd-Frank bill to restore Glass-Steagall. No one really knows that this happened. And it was like, it was one of these things that wasn't some big political mobilization to do it, but certain institutions recognized that this would solve the problem. Now, the level of political attack on Cantwell, the level of what Reed did to enforce it, was very, very intense, and that signaled to Cantwell, McCain, and some others what they were actually up against, and I think they were shocked. Like, wait a second, what is this? We thought this just made good sense, you know. You separate your commercial banks away from your gambling. You don't. That way, you don't have Wall Street activities subsidized and financed by the U.S. government, you know. And so they were thinking of it from a practical standpoint. Now, soon thereafter, one of our DC contacts was at an event somewhere, I don't know, the British Foreign Office or something was having some event in London. And one of our economic sort of DC contacts was at the event, and a very high-level British government official came to her and said, by the way, just so you know, the British government considers Glass-Steagall to be a casus belli, okay, a cause of war.
Right.
So that, she was again like, what? Financial reform is warfare, right? So now after that, we were basically told, forget about Glass-Steagall. This is there. We haven't even realized what we're up against. Now we kept fighting for it.
Let me ask you, sorry.
Yeah.
You must have thought about why Glass-Steagall was revoked in the first place in 1999 when Bill Clinton threw it out.
You know why?
I think
I'm going to tell you.
I was
Senator Grant from Texas
right.
Was able to force enough support in the Senate to get Glass-Steagall overturned, and he went to Clinton and told him that they were going to do it no matter what, and that they wanted him to just basically acquiesce to it. And
But what is the rationale behind it? You know, always is some other side.
Philip Graham wanted to get rich for himself, and he did it because he was basically the errand boy for these banking interests. And his reward was he was made the president and the chairman of the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin. He had tried to become the president of Texas A&M University, but there was so much opposition to him, it didn't happen. But that's why. The personal greed.
No,
Well, that's for a grant.
But the rationale, you know, why should we make this change? What's the?
Oh,
No,
so
look,
we can
look,
have
look.
speculative derivatives and all this stuff.
Look, these derivatives and stuff, I guarantee
that's
that.
the real reason. What's the rationale? What is the surface of it?
Look, I think that there's a thing in this room, and probably most of us, we don't get how these people think, but they didn't create the derivatives and all this just simply to make a bunch of money. The British monarchy doesn't care about money, okay? They don't care about having bank accounts with gazillions of dollars in their bank account, right?
Even though they have them.
They created the derivatives. They created the petrodollar. They created the entire single integrated system and sought to destroy Glass-Steagall and sought to destroy the American credit policy, because what Glass-Steagall and an American credit policy do together is they actually establish a scientific value for wealth, right? That the only way you can create wealth in that kind of a system is you improve the productive power of your labor. You improve the creative power of your citizenry. Now, for the British monarchy, they don't want scientific competence. They don't want expanding technology. They want a bunch of stupid peasants. So what they did is they created this financial, fakery, yeah,
Fluff and feathers.
to expand a political system of political control over governments. And so from their standpoint, they weren't looking just simply, oh, we're going to repeal Glass-Steagall, blow a big derivatives bubble and get rich. They were using the speculative financial activity to gain control over governments.
I understand the way you're describing it, but when somebody comes to propose a bill, let's repeal Glass-Steagall.
Yeah.
What do they say?
Okay, I get your question. All right. So what they would say is, first off, in the United States, the Wall Street firms, they approached the Wall Street firms and they said, look, the British, they have these exotic financial instruments and they get big returns. And under Glass-Steagall standards, you schmucks are sitting here only getting your, 3, 4, 5% returns. Wouldn't you like to engage and wouldn't you like to be competitive in the global markets?
There you go.
So that's what it was.
Not only Britain, but also China and Japan were
Yeah. So the idea was to be competitive in the global markets, right? And be able to engage in these.
So now when you go back to repeal it, wouldn't that be an opposition?
Yeah, well then you could just simply say, oh, look what all your great competitive system brought you. Death and destruction and ruin.
But isn't it a double-edged sword that if you go out competed by the Chinese or the Japanese or the British,
right?
With their genius bubble systems.
Yeah, but see, first off, if the United States does this, immediately Europe will have to bend because they know what they've known all along. There's nothing behind this derivatives bubble. So if the United States calls basically a kind of a margin call on this stuff, we wipe it out off the books in the United States, you separate the crap, then you're going to have a chain reaction where the collapse would hit those nations and it would be a similar kind of, there wouldn't be any competition with this kind of derivatives betting because no one would want, there wouldn't be any advantage to be a part of it because it would all be blowing out, the bubble would be popped. So, but the real point is now people are realizing what the actual real value is being determined by what the BRICS are now doing, in terms of the value. And that system isn't pure speculation. It's based on what kind of projects are you doing, what kind of improvement of the overall economy.
It's really harkening back to the original American system, which had the country flourishing in its early days and the periods that it was actually in play. He's constantly fighting against the British financial forces who were trying to upend it. So it didn't have a real serious continuity, but in the periods that it was in play, tremendous things happened.
Thank you.
We need to wipe the financial community in New York out and move it all to San Francisco.
Yeah, he's right. That's the right.
Everything.
Yeah, right.
I mean, like Dave was saying that we didn't know how we were going to get Glass-Steagall in, but it happened. And it took a lot of damn work going to state legislator meetings, getting people to write letters, calling their congressmen, going out in the streets, organizing people. But then the most important thing is to have the conception of what does it really mean. Because what you're really saying to people now is, human beings have a right to dignity. And what's happening to the Greek people is completely undignified and inhuman. That you're going to sacrifice the population for the sake of financial aggregates. That's disgusting. That's not humanity, that's slavery. And so you've got to get that into the minds of people and realize that their lives are on the line right now. And we have been finding people coming up in the streets, like probably here when you guys have met us, just saying, what's Glass-Steagall? What's happening in Greece? What's happening? Why are we going to war with Russia? I don't want to go to war with Russia. Just like asking questions and being really honest that they're ignorant about what's going on. So we have to be the leaders and tell them and give them the conceptual outlook and get people to do everything. There's not going to be some mechanism or thing. People can get creative and figure out something that we probably could never think of.
Notice you have a Facebook page.
Yeah.
You have all this stuff there, so that's probably the best way to get young people to work.
That and also getting them off their phone. Getting them to think.
They're basically selling this for people with intense for spend money on artists. And I'm not from college students, so honestly speaking, if they offer a job, like I'll take it. And it's just I just want to do it. There's too many information out there, and I don't know which one to trust.
Well, that's something that we actually work on a lot as a cultural organization, is how do you come to know something to be true? And that was the real question that Plato had asked. This was what he was fighting in Athens. He just had people who were sophists who would argue one side or the other.
Basically, the Glass-Steagall Act, repeal will go towards more infrastructure-based projects and done through development banks like the Asian Development Bank, and more banks being created like that, we could eventually finance something like the Bering Strait crossing and create real economic prosperity versus prosperity through creating more derivative products.
Well, yes, ultimately, but what really Glass-Steagall is, it's people know it's the separation of
Investment,
commercial, insurance can't be under one roof, right? So once we bring Glass-Steagall in, you have a kind of a de facto audit, and all the speculative stuff on the books of the bank, either they can shift that and create another entity that a Wall Street entity, but a lot of them are just going to get wiped out because they've got.
Well, the biggest thing that I didn't hear mentioned here was the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
That's a direct consequence of repeal.
Exactly.
So that's something I think you could easily inform the layperson that we can have potentially a 10 times bigger 2008, and that's my greatest fear. I mean, rather than of course, I truly respect this project would be, global change. But, people probably don't know about this. People do know about the 2008 crash.
Yeah. Well, look, just to be clear, what Hal presented tonight this isn't like the thing that is, the LaRouche movement is doing. It's one of many. This is just simply the U.S. connection to this Silk Road concept, right? But
no, I understand. All I'm saying is that instead of saying Glass-Steagall Act, you should probably say, what can we do to avoid a mega 2008 return?
Senator Warren in her Senate hearing last year, I forget exactly what the hearing was, but she just said, look, the 5 biggest banks are now 40% bigger in assets.
I forget, it was like 2/3 bigger of the kind of financial mortgage-backed securities and these types. The other things that's happened is that what the Fed has been doing through these, the kind of the backdoor bailout, is they've been buying up, I think it's $4 trillion worth of the mortgage-backed securities and so forth, right? Which was supposed to be, the idea was, well, no, this is gonna allow the banks to then increase lending. And lending in that time has gone down on the so-called Main Street banks, has gone down by $1 trillion. So yeah, there's a lot of material that can kind of piece it together. And frankly, you know, people who, they know that what Wall Street did with the gambling on the mortgage bubble, they would have never done that under Glass-Steagall standards,
So that's.
because they knew they would have never gotten a bailout for it.
That's the thing I think you need to, publicize. That,
Yeah.
You could have another much bigger 2008 and, you let go of a couple of big banks back then, or just one in particular. But now there's only 5 banks left, like you correctly pointed out. So how can you let a bank go? You'll have to bail them out. If you collapse one of 5 big banks in the US, you collapse the whole economy.
Yes, however, I will say this. A lot of people know that the system's probably going to collapse again. But what you actually have to then motivate them around is what we can do, you know? In other words, we're not just trying to stop something bad. We're trying to get rid of a whole rotten, evil system, which is what Glass-Steagall does. But we gotta, you also gotta give people a sense like, look, that the horror that you face for thinking about the future for your children and grandchildren, there's a way out, and people will be motivated also by a sense of what can be done, Miles, did you?
Yeah, I just had some technical questions about the actual rail itself. So I hope it's okay if I just kind of ask a few. When people are talking about building this railroad, who owns those gauges? Like, my understanding is that railroads in this country aren't public per se. Like, they're owned by railroad companies.
That's correct.
So those companies, like, they have proprietary what is it?
Ownership of
Jurisdiction
the land
over like the actual steel and the railroads and all that kind of stuff. What's in the cards to make them want to comply with this Bering Strait? I mean, if all their financing is coming from these dollars, right? What's actually in the cards to make them say, hey, will you give us your gauge so that we can connect this? Do they even have to? Can actually, I mean, and today, and I'm imagining that these railroad companies monopolize the labor too. That actually, the people who actually know how to build railroads in this world, like, what's to make them move on this?
Well, companies that build railroads and companies that run railroads are two very different sets.
Okay.
The railroad building companies are happy to have any business they have.
Okay.
Now, the railroad companies, who would be involved in this and to what extent?
Yeah.
If you're going to build the Bering Strait Tunnel, the first one you have is the Alaska Railroad. That happens to be owned by the state of Alaska. It's a publicly owned entity. Then you come down into Canada and you have Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Railways. Now, they're both privately owned. Canadian National used to be owned by the Canadian government. It was privatized 15 years ago. Interestingly enough, its largest stockholder is Bill Gates. Canadian Pacific, which is somewhat smaller, is a stockholder-owned company. Warren Buffett is its largest stockholder. My guess
Warren
is
Buffett has only told Bill Gates.
they're friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, they share things together, and they both jointly invest. They're major railroad investors.
Yeah.
And then you come down to the United States and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Warren Buffett's company owns it.
Okay.
And they're putting lots and lots and lots of money into expanding it. but all on freight, not on passengers. That's under Amtrak, under the federal government. In Canada, it's VIA, which is also owned by the federal government. And passenger service in this country, by rail, is de-emphasized. This gets built, it'll probably be financed by China. And they'll bring partners in, US companies to help build, and they'll or share traffic with the railroad. Where will they connect? Probably Edmonton, Alberta.
Would you have to get past Warren Buffett and Bill Gates?
No, they'd be more than happy to get more traffic. Canadian rail traffic's probably going to double if it gets built.
Well, I'm not sure I agree.
Well-
Meaning that I think those guys are
They're part of the oligarchy.
right and would if would weigh the geopolitical considerations. And now I'm not saying they wouldn't if they saw the tide turning and they would just go along with it as another business opportunity, but I do think that they're tied with the
Oh, they are, but the point is they're far away from where we connect.
But the Queen of England say she wouldn't come and say.
They'd try to
Bill
stop
Gates
the whole
said
project. They'd try to stop the
they're
entire
not
project. Yeah, they try to stop the project, and they do have ties with Bill Gates.
Is that what Bilderberg Group and this is all about?
Probably they're involved too, yeah, and would be opposing it. That's why there's opposition. This is why it hasn't happened.
Okay.
And the article that I gave you points out very clearly that there's two proponents of the Bering Strait Tunnel in North America. One of them is in this room,
Right.
and the other is in Anchorage, Alaska. His name is Fyodor Soloviev, who happens to be from Russia, and he owns a mining company. Do you hear anybody? I mean, do you hear anybody outside this room talking about it? Well, there's a reason. I don't want to talk about it. What's that?
Not exactly household names.
No, it's not exactly a household concept. Absolutely.
Well, I just want to make sort of stress one point. I mean, Hal went into some of the history of it, but in addition to being posed back in the 1860s, it was brought up partly as an idea of how to supply the Soviets during World War II.
Oh, yes.
That was one.
Should I go into that, David?
If you want to do a quick sketch of the different times it was posed.
Franklin Roosevelt's uncle, Frederick Delano, went to Franklin and said, Franklin, you need to look at supplying Russia and do it by rail. So when the Alaska Highway was built in 1942, in parallel, the Corps of Engineers did a feasibility study building a railroad to Alaska. Now, feasibility study had already been done in Russia during the 1930s under Stalin. And they had a line that was going from a place called Skobrodino in eastern Siberia all the way to the Bering Strait through the Saharan Republic. It was called Yakutia then, through Yakutsk. Another line was going from Vorkuta in the west, northeast of Moscow, all the way to the Bering Strait along the south side of the Arctic Ocean. And it was to connect the concentration camps. And that study was done by the NKVD, the secret police. I have a copy of the study. I bet you I'm the only person in North America who has one, except perhaps the CIA.
I'm sure they have one.
Well, just to make one, so it's been posed on a number of occasions now. Hal mentioned this, that there's no other political group that's backed it. Well, in part because we're the ones that brought it forward as a viable idea. And, there may be practical considerations for the Bering Strait tunnel, the massive development potential in Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon. That's you name it, resource wealth beyond imagination that actually could be developed. That you could have processing facilities and all that up there if you have the transportation route, right? But Lynn and Helga, who have fought for this idea going way back, they've always approached it from the standpoint that this is how we integrate the Eurasian land bridge and to become the world land bridge. And we end geopolitics and we bring nations together. So us fighting for this partly because we've had that, Lynn and Helga have had that kind of vision. No other political group wants to touch it because they know what happens when you push something that Lynn and Helga, they come down on you hard, you know. So I just want to make that clear. There's a lot of, now that it's a discussion process, there's other elements that make it sort of a practical deal. But the reality is it's a symbol of the end of this whole geopolitical approach.
I have another question for Hal. David, I hope you don't mind if I ask this question again. We had touched upon it, but I think this is like a good point to reopen the question about in terms of like a feasibility study. I wonder, like David, when you talk about how there's going to be unimaginable floating on these rails, and you were talking about, in Vancouver, you have these like unprecedented mobs, for lack of a better term, of board
people.
How do you expect to balance, a railway? I wonder, like in terms of security, how do you balance the idea of having like a railroad just kind of float through your neighborhood, and there might be, it seems like the potential for it's like banditry is sort of reopened again. Like it seems like, you'd be closing the door to geopolitics, but then opening a new door to, I guess like a new age of piracy that's a lot more.
You know how you solve that problem?
How do you solve that?
Run the trains fast. If they're running at 70 miles an hour, it's hard to have thievery. Now, in places like certain countries in Africa, that is definitely a problem. The other thing is, most of the area where the Bering Strait tunnel railroad connections are going to get built are pretty darn cold. These softies don't go there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a hardened criminal, but I'm just thinking, like, in terms of people monitoring, like the railroads, like no one's gonna. I mean, it would be hard. You'd have to pay someone a lot of money to sit, in Siberia to watch a railroad go by.
It would be fenced, and of course, most of the area where the railroad would be built in Siberia is unpopulated. No one lives there.
Yeah.
I flew from Moscow to Adadir in Chukotka in 2007. It was a 9.5-hour flight, and it was an 11-hour flight from Seattle to Moscow. Logic would tell you would fly to Adadir from Seattle, but no, you can't do that. And after Putin came in, they basically closed off all the places to come into Russia if you're a foreigner, except Moscow. They would keep things tightly controlled, and the other thing is you probably would have a fence right away. Your bigger problem is worrying about animals getting out on the track and getting hit,
Getting on the track.
like elk and
Ice will be a problem.
icing is a problem. However, I will tell you, the Russians have building railroads and running them in cold climates down north. They have it all figured out. They have enormous experience, which we do not have in the United States like they do. They are really experts at it. And they have some very smart people.
I would also just add that the way that crime is thought, international crime, like the real way that crime is run, the international drug trade, it is all a cohesive unit, and much of it, well, it is coordinated through the bank.
Backstop, yeah.
And we interviewed the Maria da Costa, I forget his full name, but who used to be the head of the United Nations Office of Crime and Drug something or other. It was kind of like a security, sort of a policing type agency of the UN. And we interviewed him, and he said, asked him on the question of the international drug trade, and he said, the way you get rid of the international drug trade is Glass-Steagall. The head of Russia's drug czar,
Ivanov.
Ivanov, yeah, Viktor Ivanov, also made that statement. He was in Washington D.C. and one of our activists asked him on Glass-Steagall, and he said the logic of Glass-Steagall is how you shut down the international drug trade, because you dry up the whole reason. The existence of the drug trade is simply the cash flow that goes in to feed the speculative bubble, right?
Terrorism.
Yeah, and so, but that's how you finance your terrorism. That's how you finance your black markets. So you really are shutting down with Glass-Steagall and a new orientation towards collaboration amongst nations. You're shutting down international crime in the way that it exists now too. So that, I mean,
So just net, so you really think that you can solve like all these problems in one way through like this.
well, let me put it to you this way. I would answer it the same way that Ben Franklin answered it. You know, he said, "What kind of government did you give us?" The woman that asked him during the Constitutional Convention, and he said, "Well, it's a republic if you can keep it."
Yeah.
In other words, there's no
guarantee.
simple answers for any of these things. You know.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely the case that this is we have to. The reason we exist and what we intend to do is create a certain vigilance.
Yeah.
You know, to fight for an idea about what the nature of man is. You know.
Where are you from?
Around here.
You from Seattle?
Born here, I grew up in Colorado. Came back.
Okay.
So maybe we can just break it up. Just
Thank you.
have some discussion. But thanks, Hal, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Al.
David and I will agree it's been a long battle fighting for the Bering Strait Tunnel.
G.
How you doing? Good. How's it going?
Yeah. How you feeling? How's your surgery going?
Yeah, I understand. I don't. English sounding.
So you got your doctorate?
I got my PhD in 1972 from the University of Washington.
Pardon me?
I got it in 1972 from the University of Washington.
What was your doctorate?
Civil engineering.
Pardon me?
Civil engineering.
George, let us call you.
No, but I'm saying you have to take.
Well, I did a study of
pass
oxidizing. I did a study on oxidizing the waste liquids from crap pulp and paper mills to control oils. That's what I did a study on. 2 years.
Patty Murray needs to write.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Seal to-
We'll see you next Friday.
I never came to a quarter short of finishing my bachelor's. I learned more through this old.
You live in.
Yeah.
Your
Pardon me?
congressman is.
No, I do know that.
A quarter short and I had some stances from the part I returned home.
He ran for
I'm learning a
Congress.
lot more here than was not here.
Where do you live, Holly?
Where did you go to school?
Bellevue.
I just moved
Where
to
did you go to college?
I used to live in California.
Oh,
The
we're
United
about
States has really
Where did you go to
illustrated
school?
the area of
We're not
college.
Yeah, where?
in
Community
Cerritos.
college and then
Oh, yeah.
I got my degree in Central Washington.
Yes.
I'm
You
from
almost
the
finished.
I was gonna
What
say
were you
it
studying?
started around.
We had an office. Well, we have an office in Pasadena. We had an office.
Could you finish if you want?
Well, yeah.
Pardon me?
Glendale.
Could you finish if you want?
But we would go all over.
Proposed, but problems is I
Orange
couldn't,
County.
I'm limited on my memory.
All over the
Couldn't say anything real.
Yeah, well, on the west, we have Seattle,
That's true.
San
If you want to be
Francisco.
relevant, this is a group.
Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, Detroit,
Keen history from a different
Boston,
perspective.
We all.
Philadelphia, New York, New
terms of what we learn inside out. I always had a feeling when I was learning in school was questionable.
I was wondering, you both history of the US includes things that were not in history.
Our website's pretty good.
The one on world
One
history.
thing, Ali, that I would suggest is to subscribe to EIR.
Yeah.
My favorite subject was history.
Pardon me?
My favorite subject was history.
Pardon me?
My favorite subject was
That's-
history.
I thought you just had some history to it.
Yeah.
The Executive Intelligence Review, the magazine.
I didn't remember.
Yeah.
I remember subscribing to something.
You get it through your email. Yeah, you can use use like a Kindle device or just read it on your computer. It's an online.
Well, we had a magazine.
You get an email?
You get a password.
You know, the problem you were talking about, you know where that's a problem with theft?
Where?
In railroad yards in the major
You may not have got.
I mean,
it takes a little while.
Because there's a lot of places to hide stuff in major cities. I figure.
Well, that's where you normally are gonna have that problem.
Here, I'll show you.
And I figure like the other place is the, just because I didn't know that there were different gauges for different railroads. That was something that I didn't know about. So I figured like those junction stations where you have to transfer the cars, that would be a window where, you may have 99 cars going in and then
Official.
99 light cars going out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would happen in some countries. Probably not in China.
They release it every
Yeah.
Yeah,
5,
well,
10 years.
we've got a special.
They have things pretty well under control there.
It's like
Have you ever been there?
I've been to Seoul. I haven't been to China.
And this one's
But anyway,
different.
Nice to meet you.
Great to see you. Look forward to seeing you again. And
You'll be around?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you live here in the area or you're
I
from
live
some?
one reason down.
Oh, okay, yeah. Driving here from Redmond, so. Yeah, you're from the neighborhood.
What do you do?
Right now I'm a student, and
And where? UW?
well, transferring there. Actually, I started out. I don't know if you've heard of Deep Springs College.
Started off by saying,
Yeah, not many people
Where's
have.
that?
It's in California. Near the nearest town is Bishop.
Oh, in the Owens Valley.
Yeah, exactly. So I went to school there.
Did you live there?
Yeah, I lived there for 2 years. So I did like liberal arts kind of program, great books kind of school. It's a great books kind of school. So I did that for a little while.
When do you finish?
Anyways, I'm just gonna.
I don't know because I changed majors. I mean, I was sort of like
That human beings.
when I left high school, I wanted to do policy, but then I kind of learned more about it, saw different things, started doing more reading, and then I thought,
The sin in our heart
it might be more
takes
effective
the form
to
of
learn some,
pollution.
it might be more
in the air,
effective
the water, and the
to go along the track where like you don't end up being like a Seacrest person where you're just like at the end of a barrel of a gun. Because it seems like, like I thought, okay, if I'm a policy wonk, then I'll just like talk and we'll actually discuss the ideas. But it also strikes me that, and this is one small criticism I have about like the LaRouchePAC, is that they're quite frankly, I think it's kind of, it's unfortunate because I think precisely because they're so honest about their actual intentions, I think that's actually what things go wrong, because it just opens them up for attack, from different agents. And so it seems like, even though like the LaRouchePAC is like the one place, as you said, that like actually advocates along these lines, I think it also is a sign that they're actually like the worst at doing chess.
Of this has
Well,
said
it's the old
that,
story of the role of the truth teller.
we
It's not a
need
popular
to
one.
Yeah.
have
No, I've definitely been in that case where like,
human-centric view of the world.
I don't want to say I've been like that
Problem
truth
is
teller,
that
but
the
I've been in,
thing is that
minority
people
positions all my life. I mean,
think of human
I live in,
beings
I'm a black
as
guy in
more
Seattle,
important than
Washington.
they really
Well,
are.
and you
You
lived in Owens Valley. There aren't very many black people.
squirrels and
So I mean,
Could
for
you
one
go back? Is that a 4-year school?
It's actually a 2-year school, but it's like, I encourage you to look it up. It's actually like
just equally as important.
it's an
as human
old
beings.
school. It's an old school, and it has like
How many students?
Then he
do you
said,
have?
the real issue is the Renaissance.
it's really kind of eclectic. It only takes 13 students a year.
Optimistic.
So
Maybe that's why.
yeah, that's why there aren't very many
It's not the
alumni.
University of California.
Yeah, there aren't very many alumni walking around.
The,
There's really only like 1,000 people alive who've gone to the school. But anyway,
Did you finish there and get your 2 years done?
I got my 2 years done there. Now I'm just doing construction management here.
Where?
embolden
At
this.
For now, just a community college, take a skip of credits.
Will you get a 4-year degree?
Yeah, I'll get a 4-year degree.
It's a good idea. You know, unfortunately, we live in a society of certificates.
So, just
Pieces
some
of
things to
paper are
think about.
important, like this
I know,
is
man.
here, the finish.
Titles.
Can't see, yeah, titles and certificates are very important.
Yeah. So I took a year off this last year and I did a bunch of different jobs. So I learned.
Or not.
Well, you know, when I
Learned a
finished
bunch of
my
different
master's
skills.
degree, I was told by my advisor, look, we could have you go on for your PhD, but we think you'd be profitable by working for a while.
Well,
Yeah.
we've taken this.
And I worked for 4 years with the pulp and paper industry, and my job was to sample smokestacks at paper mills.
Oh, really?
And I learned a lot during that 4 years.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! And when I came back, I had a very different view of school than I had when I left my master's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Well,
only-
I'd
I guess-
encourage you to finish, though.
Yeah. No, I definitely, I mean, I'm in the process. It's not a matter of resisting.
Stuart.
But you know, you can always develop diversions in your life. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Things come up that change your life, you know, and then you start on something, and then what happens? You don't finish. I was very fortunate that I was able to come back and get my PhD and finish and start teaching, and I taught.
If you want to, I could give you a ride to at least downtown.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way it goes. Well, now I know about Deep Springs College.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm working for a company in Santa Ana now, so I go down there 2 weeks a month.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Yep. Southern California is an interesting place.
Yeah, for sure. Especially Eastern Sierra, which doesn't get a lot of attention.
Yes, exactly. Well, listen, good to talk to you guys, and it was an interesting evening.
For sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.
Okay, thanks.
We're all organizers. We have a good handful of us.
Oh,
Yeah, you
there you go.
Pardon
We
me?
do, we do a lot.
Miles? Like Miles Davis?
Yeah.
Miles. M-I-L-E-S.
Oh,
Are you
I,
guys all
Yeah, exactly.
volunteers?
I do.
Nice to meet you.
thank you.
Yeah.
You can call, I do this
Right.
every day.
For sure. I've seen you come here a bunch of times, so I know you're very loyal.
No, I don't.
But do you
A lot of reading.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we do what we can.
Uh-huh.
We're not exactly a
That's all good.
standard paycheck employee. Let me just, we were just talking about the
Anyway,
post cyclical.
I see.
Cyclical.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, my
So,
personal opinion is that,
it's like he's been around the block.
there are a lot of times when people are, wiser, like, sort of like.
Yeah, so anyway.
Yeah. They encourage.
So, yeah. I'll be back.
Like, they always use the analogy of God.
Adios.
See you.
How we're supposed to.
Oh, actually, Dave, you guys might want to check this out. I'm working on
I
it.
agree that there are times when, some opinions are superior or more moral than other opinions out there. I don't think they're the, except like the truth of the matter, but like in situations where,
Well, sometimes we've been lost about that van running.
Hitler, like, we call him like, we say he was a psychopath.
If she tried to stole the windows and the
But, he could have been just, just like, anybody else.
He was a puppet, actually.
And
There's big financial interest that. Sure.
exactly, and like, what happened to Greece? I think it happened to Korea in 1998, and so like all the people of Korea out of good heart to save the country out of our good heart, we gave up our gold. So Korea, like we used to have gold, then we gave all the gold to the IMF, to pay off the debt, and like that was a trap. Like, I don't want to blame, but like honestly, like, well, you're not American, you're not the government, but like you guys.
No, it was criminal. It was criminal.
Yeah. So they made us buy DVDs. They didn't want the public to fantasize about BMW and Mercedes-Benz. And now that we purchased all that, we didn't have any. We were in huge debt, and we had to give up all our actual valuable.
Hello, next time.
And you guys
Thank you,
are
Al.
a country, we're basically puppets.
Good to see you.
slaves.
That
Thank
was
you so
fun.
much, Al.
Good to see you.
Take care.
To,
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
to the
Thank you so
big
much.
financial.
I am,
Yep.
yes.
No, I know it.
And I are good Presbyterians.
I don't know who's running that.
Well,
That's why I came to the here.
Well, it's interesting. No, yeah, it's interesting actually because what you're saying is absolutely true. But the IMF was actually founded to be something good.
Just like the UN.
Yeah, just like the UN. Do you know who founded it?
I don't.
Franklin Roosevelt.
FDR?
The UN meeting was, I think, in 1945. He was either dead or dying, but anyways, Franklin Roosevelt founded these institutions as part of his view of the post-World War II world.
And I don't know. Can I ask you a question? What do you guys think about the University of Washington? Is it from your perspective, is it an evil institution for profit? Because like now I see it
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot more profit than it used to be.
Yeah, you'll need the, I don't.
Yeah, well, look,
I'm sure,
yeah, I mean, look, this is why we're saying the
Right.
BRICS are so
I'm sure one of us.
exciting
will
because
be alright.
China, for example, is establishing what they want to have as
I'm
a
sure one of
public
us can
education
do
system,
it. I know, yeah.
national in China, which is
Yeah,
good. We
yeah.
at one point
Yeah.
had a good
I
national
gotta stop
education
this recording.
program, but now students go to school, and aside from whether we want to argue if you're getting a good education or not, which